Death of the Boogeyman. Charles Miles Maddox Manson, dead at age 83, just moments ago in California. Death of the Boogeyman. I'm Jeffrey Daugherty, the Christian Whistleblower, welcoming you to the Gospel Truth program on this early morning, 3 a.m. Monday morning on the East Coast of the United States. I'm going to bring you some information today that I don't believe that you've ever received about Charles Manson, and some information that you probably won't receive anywhere else about Charles Manson. And we will have at least one more broadcast, perhaps a couple more, about Charles Manson and about his life and about the atrocities that he was accused of, the atrocities that he participated in. Maybe give you some other things to think about, maybe give you some other things to ponder, maybe give you some other things to consider about Charles Manson, ladies and gentlemen. Charles Manson. Have a listen to this to kind of frame our discussion. U2, of course, covering the Beatles tune Helter Skelter, which came to be almost synonymous with the life of Charles Miles Maddox Manson. Many of you already learning things, didn't know that Charles Manson was named that in actuality. Let's take a look at this man and take a look at how he became the boogeyman. Charles Miles Manson, born Charles Miles Maddox, born on November 12th, 1934. Born on November 12th, 1934. Since it's 3 a.m., let's do some on-the-fly numerology on Charles Manson. What say you? Some on-the-fly numerology about Charles Manson. So that's 11, 12, 1, 9, 3, 4. So we got 1 and 1 is 2, 3. So that's a 5. That's 15, 18, 22. Oh my goodness. That is fascinating. Charles Manson. Charles Manson, life path number was a 22. Let me just do this again. 4 and 3 is 7, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. Charles Manson's life path number was a 22, a master number, special significance, 22. On the positive, 22s are wise and are humanitarian. Not exactly two words that are associated often with Charles Manson. And on the negative, a 22 can be overbearing. That's interesting. Let's do the death date just for the fun of it. 11/19, 2017. 8, 10, 19, 20, 21, 22. Ladies and gentlemen, Charles Manson, birth date 22. Charles Manson, death date 22. That's amazing. A 2 is modest and peacemaking, 22 being double 2. Negative, oversensitive, uncertain. 22 being 2 11s, leads by example on the positive, oversensitive and timid on the negative. Ladies and gentlemen, that is rather disturbing, if you will. Rather disturbing, if you will. Charles Manson, a 22 life path number and a 22 death path number. Charles Manson heading into the next life with a 22 master number of his death. That, ladies and gentlemen, is fascinating. I wasn't expecting that. I didn't think about doing that until just when we did it, and that is rather remarkable. That's why I'm the Christian whistleblower, and that's why you're here. Because you get stuff here you're not going to get anywhere else. And that's what this is all about. He was an American criminal, cult leader of a quasi-commune, California, late 1960s. Manson's followers committed a series of 9 murders at 4 locations in July and August of 1969. He was found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder and the deaths of 7 people, including the actress Sharon Tate. And if you folks don't know who Sharon Tate is, well, we'll show you her later. All of which were carried out by members of the group at his instruction. Interestingly enough, Manson himself never killed anyone. Manson also received first-degree murder convictions in 2 other deaths. He was originally sentenced to death, but his sentence was commuted to life in prison when California invalidated the state's death penalty in 1972. Manson believed in what he called helter-skelter, an apocalyptic race war. From the beginning of his notoriety, he was a pop culture, an emblem of insanity, violence, and the macabre. What is the macabre? Well, that means the quality of having a grim or ghastly atmosphere. You know, we look up words around here. We clear those words. As the family began to form, Manson was unemployed and a former convict who spent half his life in correctional institutions for a variety of offenses. How many of you knew he was a singer-songwriter? On the fringe of the LA music industry, associated with Dennis Wilson, drummer, founding member of the Beach Boys. Various musicians have covered some of Manson's songs. Look at this. Here's Charles Manson's inmate number. 966-856. 966-856. Let's say there's 9 and 6 is 15, 21, 29, 34, 44. His inmate number, whoops, sorry about that, was a 4. So he was assigned by the state as a 4. Excessive, narrow-minded, or trustworthy and devoted. A 4 associated with Mercury. Stubborn, obstructive, confronting, antagonistic, righteous, reliable, consistent, trustworthy, loyal, cautious, organized, conservative, grounding energy, 4 directions, 4 elements, lucky color green, gemstone emerald, lucky days 4th, 13th, 22nd, or 31st. 4th, 13th, 22nd, or 31st. Be interesting to see when those murders were committed. We'll take a look at that as we move forward. So Charles Manson, already interesting stuff. Listen to the life of this man. Born to an unmarried 16-year-old girl. He was first named No Name Maddox. The man started his life called No Name Maddox. And remember that as I take you to another place later. No name. Within weeks, how many weeks did he spend without a name? And how does that affect somebody on a psychic level? Within few weeks, he was called Charles Miles Maddox. Amazing. He spent 7 months at the National Training School for Boys in Washington, D.C. Never knew his father. His father was evidently a transient laborer. Manson's mother and brother were sentenced to 5 years in prison for robbing a Charleston, West Virginia service station, whereupon Manson was placed in the home of an aunt and uncle. When she got out of jail, Manson's mother retrieved young Manson and lived with him in a series of rundown hotel rooms. Charlie said her hugging him on the day she returned home from prison was his one happy childhood memory. 5 years later, Kathleen Maddox tried to have her son placed in a foster home. None was available, and the court placed him in the Gabalt School for Boys in Terre Haute, Indiana. Conceived in 1909 by the Knights of Columbus. Wow. Charles Manson attended the school. William Hirons also attended the school. If that name rings a bell, that's because he was the lipstick killer. Because he left a notorious message scrawled in lipstick at a crime scene. I wonder if he was there the same time as, no, maybe. I wonder if he was there the same time as Manson. Is that where Manson got his idea of how to scrawl on the walls things? That's interesting. Did Charlie get some ideas from William Hirons, the lipstick killer? And of course, the Knights of Columbus, a Catholic institution, had a part in creating the boogeyman, which would be Charles Manson. He got out of there after being rejected by his mother. The horror of this man's upbringing beggars description. Thrown out of the school for boys after 10 months, taken to his mother who rejected him, robbed a liquor store to rent a room, got caught stealing a bicycle, went to an Indianapolis juvenile center, recaptured and placed in Boys Town. Boys and Girls Town, Father Flanagan's Homes, back into the embrace of the Catholic Church in Boys Town, Nebraska. Wow. One can only wonder what happened to Charles Manson in Catholic boys' homes. Later went on to the Indiana Boys School. Another Indiana boys' school. Another boys' school, pardon me. On October 51, a psychiatrist recommended that he go to the National Bridge Honor Camp, minimum security. Manson transferred to the Federal Reformatory in Ohio. Got a parole, went with his family to West Virginia. Had a pregnant wife. Got arrested in Indianapolis for violating his probation. While Manson was in prison, Rosalie gave birth to their son, Charles Manson Jr. I didn't know there was a Charles Manson Jr. Less than 2 weeks before a scheduled parole hearing, Manson tried to escape by stealing a car, was given 5 more years probation, parole denied, went back to prison for pimping a 16-year-old girl. What a nice guy. Pleaded guilty to attempting to cash a forged U.S. Treasury check. 10 years suspended sentence. Pimping girls again. 2 years at the penitentiary at McNeil Island. Had his charges dropped. By March 21, 1967, the day he was released from Terminal Island, he had spent more than half of his 32 years in prisons and other institutions. Prison was his home. He requested to stay. They let him out. He said, "Can I please stay?" Remember these facts, ladies and gentlemen. Charles Manson asked to stay in prison. Why would a man ask to stay in prison? But they did not let him stay in prison. They released him early, March 21st, 1967, after he spent half of his 32 years in prison. He asked them, "Please keep me in prison." They said no. They turned him out. Keep this in mind, ladies and gentlemen. Amazing, crazy facts about Charles Manson. In 68 and 69, Manson attracted a communal cult. These are the same people that would later murder actress Sharon Tate, 4 others in her home on August 9th, 1969. What are the lucky numbers again of the 4? Not the 9th. 9, 10, 19, 25, 35, 34, 7. No. Interesting. He was at 22. Nothing to see there. And he was in prison for the rest of his life after being convicted of those murders. On January 1st of this year, he was rushed from the California State Prison to Mercy Hospital in Bakersfield, suffering from gastrointestinal bleeding. He returned to prison in January. Then on November 15th, just 5 days ago, he was returned to the hospital in Bakersfield. He died of natural causes on November 19th, yesterday, at the age of 83. 11, 8, 3, 11. He's a 22, a double 11. 22, 1, 1 is 2, 22. Very, very interesting stuff about Charles, Miles, Maddox, Manson. Let's take a peek in the chat room to see, number one, if anybody's here, and number two, if anybody has any questions or statements. that are worthy of discussion here in this forum. I have a feeling that there just might be somebody here with something interesting to say. So much darkness in that canyon. Many men do or just continue to commit crimes. He knew how to survive in prison. Yes, he did. Nebraska is an MK Ultra cult. Satanic murder in Jack Nicholson's home. I think she might have met Nicholson. I'm not sure what that is. Roman Polanski, pedophile. Surprised he lasted that long. Morgan Freeman interviewed a serial killer. He didn't want left out either. He said he knew he would act on his impulses again. Didn't want to let him out. Gotcha. Interesting stuff. So let's look a little bit deeper into Charles Manson. Let's try to look beyond the boogeyman if we can. And remember that Charles Manson spent his earliest years or his earliest weeks as no name Maddox. The man didn't even have a name, which frames this next little bit, I think, in a very interesting light. So I want you to take a look at this really quickly as we begin to continue to think about Charles Manson. This is a clip of an answer that Charles Manson gave to an interviewer when he was asked, "Charlie, who are you?" Listen to his answer, and we're going to discuss a little bit about the enlightenment, supposedly, of Charles Manson. And we're looking at disinfo.com. Charlie, who are you?
People look at you today, 20 years later, and they still have no idea what you're about. Tell me in a sentence who you are. Nobody. I'm nobody. I'm a tramp, a bum, a hobo. I'm a boxcar and a jug of wine. And a straight razor if you get too close to me.
Wow. I'm nobody, said Charles Manson. And how interesting was it that he really was nobody for at least a few weeks? He didn't even have a name. Now, when I read that, when I heard that I am nobody, it drew my mind, just like it drew the authors, right to this. There's a concept in Buddhism called anatta. And it refers to the, according to Wikipedia, it refers to the doctrine of non-self. There's no unchanging, permanent self, soul, or essence in living beings. It's one of the 7 beneficial perceptions in Buddhism. And with dukkha or suffering and anatta impermanence, it's one of the right understandings about the 3 marks of existence. So Manson says, I'm nobody. And for weeks, he literally was no name Maddox. So was there something deeper about Charlie Manson than we have been led to know, allowed to know, or led to believe? Manson said that he was no one. He was nobody. And this author, Ted Heisman, wrote this back in May of 2013. And he observes that in Manson's interviews, he completely dominates all his interviewers, runs circles around them. Interviewers come at him in a hostile way. Manson turns it into dharmic battle and he destroys. And Manson really was the ultimate practitioner of verbal Aikido. Manson answers all the questions, dropping gems of wisdom missed by his interviewers, which is true. And this is not to be sympathetic towards Charles Manson. This is about understanding Charles Manson and looking beyond that which has been painted to us as a boogeyman. He references the interview with Geraldo Rivera. Rivera, like he always does, arrogant, thinking he was going to shame Charlie, get him to cry tears of contrition and apologize. But he didn't have a chance. Manson owned him. No amount of creative editing would give a contrary impression. And this writer talks about specifically an interview with Charlie Rose. You know who Charlie Rose is. Manson, just over 5 feet tall, possessed of incredible confidence. And Rose asked him some questions that I think are very, very illuminating into the mind of, well, we're told is a monster. But what was Charles Manson really? Let's try to understand, since he's no longer with us. Charlie Rose asked Charlie Manson. Isn't that interesting? His name was Charlie Rose, was interviewing Charlie Manson. But Rose asked Manson, do you have friends you can talk to? Manson says, I'm a friend to everything I see, everything I know, everything I feel. Said the man that wanted to stay in prison. Rose asked him, well, what about other inmates? And one of you in the chat room said, I'm surprised Charlie lasted that long in prison. Manson said, I'm a brother in these hallways for 40 years. No snitching on my jacket, no asking for nobody to protect me, and walking on my own 2 feet. Amazing. Manson talks about the rainbow, the spiritual aspect of the 60s, talking about a tree growing up from a seed and how a similar process can occur in the mind. Manson trying to talk about spiritualism, shamanism, talking down organized religion. The interviewer cuts him off. Manson goes on to answer these questions from Rose. Rose asked him, I'm not sure what this question is, but I'll just read the answers. Manson, I don't have that. Rose, you don't have that? Manson, I don't have that yin and yang thing that you people do. That yin or yang thing? Rose seems to think that yin yang as a phrase connoting nonsense, but Charlie was talking about the yin and the yin and the yang. In other words, Manson says to this interviewer, you can't make me unhappy. How is it, ladies and gentlemen, just let me ask you, how is it that Charles Manson, Charles F. Manson, Charles freaking Manson, was able to realize that no one can make him unhappy? And so many of you watching me now, tonight live, this morning live, and in the days, weeks, months, and years to come, how many of you have not got to this place where you are not in charge of your own emotional reactions? Charles Manson figured out that no one makes him unhappy. No one makes him angry. No one makes him sad. No one makes him glad. Those are all responses to stimuli. And if Charles Manson can figure out how to control his reactions to stimuli, given where he came from, what he did, where he was, don't you think that it's possible for you to learn how to manage your reactions to stimuli? If Charles Manson could figure out that no one can make him unhappy, don't you think that you should be able to figure that out as well. I hate to break it to you, Buttercup, but nobody makes you mad. Nobody makes you sad. You choose to be mad. You choose to be sad. You choose to be hurt based upon the stimuli that you receive. And of course, I'm not talking about physical abuse, things of that nature. I'm talking about actions. If Charles Manson could do it, may I suggest that you can do it as well? Rose asked him, are there sad memories growing up? Manson said, I don't have all that. Charlie Manson learned how to get over his bad memories. Don't you think that maybe you should be able to learn how to get over your bad memories? Rose says, you don't have it. You're an individual. You have an experience. You're one human being with experience. Manson. Rose raised his eyebrows with good humor, amused at Rose's attempt to put words in his mouth, and said, when you leave, go get a big rock and set it on this table. And Rose said, yeah. And Manson said, I am the big rock on the table. It's a Zen lesson, obviously. Manson says that he was merely passing through at Haight-Ashbury. He was asked why were hippies drawn to him. Manson responds that he stands on his own 2 feet. He didn't realize how rare that was and how weak most other people are. He relates the killings to a holy war, but one that no one wanted a part of. At this point in the interview, he explains love as the ground of being and the role Manson plays as an establishment scapegoat. Manson as an establishment scapegoat. Ponder that. Manson said, everything is love. There's nothing that isn't love. Even the confusion is love in one form or another. It's misguided. Love is a word to supplement for God. I'd rather use the word intelligence. If you're going to use the word love, use the word intelligence, because love is misunderstood in so many different ways and fashions. Rose asked, do you need to be loved? Manson says, loved? I am loved. I am love. Rose asked, by whom are you loved? Manson says, I am love. Rose, are you loved? Manson, all the way and around the world with it. Didn't you see? 215 times taking it in the fire with it, man. Meaning what? Meaning I'm taking up all the slack for you a-holes. I'm carrying you around. Nixon, I still got you. Reagan, hey, Ronnie, I'm intertwined in your very soul, man. Painting himself as a scapegoat. Interesting. We'll talk more about that in our next broadcast. And then Rose doesn't want to go along with Manson's idea of being scapegoat. He continues to paint Manson as a picture of psychopath, criminal, schizophrenic, which he very well may have been. And Rose asked him, Charlie, what do you say about those people who call you a monster? And Manson says, what you see is what you get. Man, they have to live with it. I don't. You have to live with your judgment. I live with mine, Manson said, smiling. You don't think of yourself? And Manson cut him off, says, that's right. I don't think of myself. Wow. Then Manson says, I don't think you guys have seen me. No, we don't understand. Manson says, you don't even understand yourselves. Rose agrees with that, but then asks Manson, what don't we understand about you? And Manson says, just what I said. I'm inside of you, man. I live inside of you. I am inside every one of you. Manson talking about the effect that he had on society and culture. And then finally, Charlie Rose says to Charlie, trying to make him out to be the monster, of course, which obviously he was for what he did. He ordered the murders, says Rose, and they deserved life in prison. When asked if he'll ever get out of prison, Manson ends the interview with, prison? I left prison in 1967. I got out of jail. Rose, but yeah, you're back. Manson said, can't you see that I'm out, man? Can't you see that I'm free? This author poses that somewhere along the line, Manson had found liberation, and that the interviewer, and perhaps many of us, and even many of you, are still captive to your own judgments. You're still captive to the establishment, and you still remain in prison. Now, I never looked Charlie Manson in the eye, although I did have an appointment to talk to him at one time. I was still a Christian, and it was canceled. But if I could have gone and interviewed him today, I would do it in a heartbeat. Is it possible that a man like Charles Manson could have found enlightenment? Is it possible that a man like Charles Manson could have actually found and discovered the essence of love? Or was he just a con man, as many of you say there in the chat room? And I think it's interesting that so many people are so quick to judge Manson when they're not even able to run their own lives in a satisfactory way, objectively viewed. Natural causes numerology is no coincidence. They killed him. I tend to agree with you. I observe to the end. Given the school connection, I reckon there's a mind control element. I tend to agree with you. Deborah Pearson, no name, no social security number, off the grid. What a piece of work his mother was. MK Ultra. Lifting the veil. An empty vessel that evil walked into and stayed, says Ebony K. Very interesting. He was not in the general pop in prison. He was in the psych section. People in the general population don't mess with those guys. He didn't manage his reactions. He didn't have any because he was a psychopath. Psychopaths do have reactions. Once you realize that you have personal responsibility, you're much happier. I'm truly impressed that you're covering this. Thank you. One truth after another. There's no way that Manson knew love. How can we say that there's no way that Manson knew love? Are we responding to a social condition? Is it possible that the establishment, that society painted Charlie Manson as the ultimate boogeyman? Was he set up in his own false flag as a patsy to take the rap and be a personification of all that the 60s was trying to show as flaws within society? Think of what Charlie Manson stood for. He stood for those dirty, smelly, rotten hippies, the same dirty, smelly, rotten hippies that were trying to get the United States to realize the atrocities it was committing around the world. Charles Manson was a boogeyman of all the crazy, weird commune cults, the same ones that were trying to say, listen, it's not about money. It's not about how much you earn. It's not about how much you can make. It's about loving one another. Charles Manson was an icon of the anti-establishment. Charles Manson was an icon of, he was a straw man, a setup, a paper cutout for everything that was supposedly wrong with the 60s. He embodied it. Was he groomed? Was he manufactured? Is that why he didn't want to get out of prison? Because he knew he was the perfect patsy for everything of the 1960s. What if the Tate LaBianca murders, what if the murders he committed weren't really committed? What if the whole thing was an operation? I'm just speculating. We'll talk more about that in our next shows. He was a con man. There's no doubt about it. He could sell anyone everything, but it looks like he sold himself something. He talks like a man that was enlightened. He talks like a man that may have found peace. If he did, we don't know. Love hurts. He shows you that you are hypocrites. We are, many of us, hypocrites. How can we say that this man could not love? We don't know him. We haven't walked a mile in his shoes. Did he do horrific things? Not personally, but did he cause others to do horrific things? Yes, he did. But is Charles Manson not also a type of... Charles Manson sent people out to murder people that didn't deserve it, that they didn't know, at the same time that the United States of America was sending young boys and girls overseas to kill people in Vietnam that they didn't know and then never done anything to them. Ooh, Jeff, you're going to get in trouble with that one. Bad Charles Manson impression, but I'm nobody. They threw Charlie in jail for what they were doing. Was he a scapegoat? I don't know. That's up to you to decide for yourself. How much does the intent factor in these type of realizations? Meaning Manson was obviously bent towards evil, but then why did he get rewarded with such deeper knowledge? Charles Manson did not do the fake murders. We'll study that. We'll look at that in our next broadcast. Even the darkest of souls can reverse completely. I agree with you, Dean Winchester. I've read a lot of biographies and documentaries, as well as talked with people who lived during that time. Maybe he felt safer in prison. I think you're right, Lauren. And what are you doing up so early? He was used to put the brakes on the movement. Dean Winchester. That is a profound statement. Connections between Charles Manson and the Beach Boys, Charles Manson and the Beatles, connects him to Elvis. There was a lot of MK Ultra, mind control, weirdness going on in the 60s, ladies and gentlemen. A lot of you here are not listening to what Jeff was reading, but Manson got it. Eventually he got it. Maybe. Was Charles Manson a deep state occultist? Maybe. He knew he was in prison. It's us who don't think we are. Profound, T. Whitten. What a good point. There is a false flag train of thought out there, and some did not die as reported. We'll look into that. He chose to incarnate into his life and woke up quicker than most. Charles Manson said, get that con out of my face. He might have. The more you learn about the higher reality, the more you realize we are in prison. Charles Manson did have a connection to Bruce Lee. I go to sleep at 4 o'clock. I still got 15 minutes. Very, very interesting. Charles Manson, the death of the boogeyman. Was Charlie just working us? Or did they use Charlie to work us? What's a boogeyman? Well, Wikipedia says that a boogeyman is a creature used in many cultures to frighten children into good behavior. If you misbehave, Charlie Manson's going to get you. The boogeyman's usually a masculine entity. The powers that be treat us like we're children, and they use people like Charlie Manson, or do they use people like Charlie Manson to frighten us into good behavior? Was Charlie Manson a monster, or was Charlie Manson a boogeyman? We're going to look tomorrow or today, later today, after I do get some sleep, at the crimes of Charlie Manson and the Manson family as they relate to the larger picture of society and culture in the late 60s and the socio-cultural / political world that was then, and see if there are other lessons to learn. Violet Flame says Charlie Manson is a reflection. Maybe he was used to reflect and amplify this concept of a merciless evil. Many faces and many parts he played, says Scott Stevenson. Observed to the end says, I'm more afraid of drinking the look aid. Good words. Good thoughts. 3:46 a.m. East Coast of the United States, November 20th, 2017, hours after the passing from this mortal plane of Charles Miles Maddox Manson. Was Charlie an MK Ultra handler, or was Charlie MK Ultra handled, or was Charlie just a great manipulator? He asked to stay in prison. What would have happened if they'd let him stay in prison? And why in the world do you let a guy out that says, I want to stay in? The man asked to stay in prison. Why did he ask to stay? And why didn't they let him? If you are in charge of a prison, and a psych prison at that, and one of the people in that prison says, man, don't let me go. I don't want to go. You don't want to let me out of here. And they let him out anyway. Why? Ebony K says they look for Charlie Manson types to pull their false flags. Good old Charlie. Let's look at this in greater depth. These are things you're not going to get anywhere else, ladies and gentlemen. This is why I'm the Christian whistleblower. And this is why you're here. Sarah says you're giving his name too much energy. I'm getting chills every time you say Charlie Manson. Sarah, I'm saying Charlie Manson as often as I can because I want Charlie Manson to give you chills. I want Charlie Manson to make you uncomfortable. I want Charlie Manson to make you think. I want Charlie Manson to make you ponder. I want Charlie Manson to get you to take a look inside of you. And I want to let Charlie Manson make me take a deeper look inside of me. Lauren, you're right. There is endless protection around this chat room. And T. Witten says, Charlie told the truth, and whether he was doing it for nefarious purposes or manipulative purposes, he did tell the truth. Dean Winchester is full of enlightenment here tonight. Charlie Manson, M-A-N-S-O-N, man, son of man. Christ was a killer. Christ is a killer. The Jesus, plastic Jesus, is a killer. So was this son of man. The death of the boogeyman. The death of Charlie Manson. Is there more to this than we've been told? And are we just believing about Charlie Manson what we've been sold? Death of the boogeyman. Charlie Manson. I'm Jeffrey Daugherty, the Christian Whistleblower. This has been The Gospel Truth. And we will be looking into more of this, probably a couple more shows. We will have a boogeyman trinity, the death of Charlie Manson. I'm Jeffrey Daugherty, the Christian Whistleblower. Thank you for being here on this early morning. I hope that Charlie will make you think. And I hope that Charlie will make you realize that no one can make you unhappy. Guide your own spirit. Master your own ascension. Be your own guru. Stay fearless, my friends, as you ask questions and question answers. You have my respect, and I salute you as you continue to unindoctrinate yourself.